Hello, friends. We are back of episode 160 of the Our Weekly Highlights podcast. My name is Eric Nance, and hopefully, if you're able to listen to this, then the world is still spinning after the little bit of an eclipse event we had here in this side of the world. But in any event, we are happy that you join us from wherever you are around the world. And as always, this show is our weekly take on the latest highlights that have been featured in this particular week's Our Weekly issue. And as always, I am never doing this alone, and he also survived the eclipse as well, my co-host Mike Thomas. Mike, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty well, Eric. Yeah, we caught it here in Connecticut on the East Coast in the USA. I think like 95% of total coverage. We weren't in the line of totality as you are, but it was still a pretty cool experience.
Yeah, us here in the Midwest got the lucky straw on this one, so had to take a very long trek. I mean, only a few steps to a field in our neighborhood to check it out with a few friends and kids around. So, yeah, all in all, a good time. Temperature goes way down. In about 3 minutes, it looked like we were in the twilight zone. But, hey, I won't complain. It was a ton of fun, and the world has still survived, so... Didn't have any like Y2K issues from yesteryear or anything like that.
Internet is still on.
It is still on. We're still recording here, and thankfully the internet's on because that means that y'all can see the latest Our Weekly issue, which we're going to be talking about now, which has been curated by John Calder, another one of our long-time contributors and curators on the project. And as always, he had tremendous help from our fellow Our Weekly team members and contributors like all of you around the world. Well, it wouldn't be Our Weekly Highlights, especially in the last few months, if we didn't check in with a good friend of the show who is continuing his journey with Nix and R. And of course, I am speaking about Bruno Rodriguez and his latest blog post on his blog, which is part 11, yes, 11 of this series of reproducible data science with Nix. And this is going to have a lot of aspects that I think you as a user and as a developer will both sympathize with and I think open your eyes to a couple really interesting things that we can do with this ecosystem. How does this part of the journey begin? Starts innocently enough with a package that Bruno has released years ago called Chronicler, and he gets an email from the CRAN maintainers saying that there's been a failure in the build. What does this mean? So, of course, he checks out the CRAN package results. And this is where things start to really get odd here, because there is only 2 instances of R on Linux, and in particular the Fedora distribution of Linux, that have the failure of the checks, yet Debian, as well as, of course, the Windows and Mac OS test results all pass. Now, that is a head-scratcher in and of its own, because intuitively you would think if there was a failure, A, it would happen everywhere, and B, even if it was isolated to Linux, that would happen on all the Linux distributions that CRAN is checking, but that is not the case here. And so Bruno starts a little detective work, right? And then he realizes, well, what would have happened on that particular day of the failure? Sure enough, there was an update to one of the dependencies, I would say a dependency of his Chronicler package, because it's not that obvious, but in particular the tidy select package, which, for those who aren't aware, is what powers now many of the tidyverse packages functions that have to do with helpers in your select calls, like maybe select one of if it starts with a string or things like that. Well, it just so happened that tidy select got a new version on this day, or at least the day before, that this failure came to be. Now, again, you're wondering, why on earth would this only affect one of the Linux variants? Turns out that Fedora is compiling the packages from source on each of these test runs, whereas the Debian distribution, and Debian is actually the base of the very popular Ubuntu distribution, that is using binaries of packages when they're available. But for Fedora, they're not as available, these binary versions of packages, and hence a recently updated version of tidyselect landed on the Fedora version, and there was an update in the tidyselect functions where a error message, in this case for eval select, was giving a more targeted message in terms of where that was actually happening in a select operation versus a subset operation. And Bruno, listening to the advice of many package authors, has a very sophisticated automated testing suite where he is able to pinpoint one of the errors where this was failing because he was grepping on the actual context of the error message of one of these select calls. We'll actually have a link in the show notes to this exact test because I was just doing a bunch of testing for an internal package myself, so I'm always curious what others are doing in this space. And sure enough, yeah, that test was being triggered. But because the other versions of Linux were not updated with the new tidyselect binary yet, those passed with flying colors because that error message was the same as what he had built it on. Well, okay, now what? Now, what could we do differently here? Or at least what he could do differently here? Well, now that he's narrowed down where this failure occurred, where could Nix come in here? Well, he has a development environment that's powered by Nix now for building his packages. And of course, for those that haven't heard the previous episodes, we've been talking about his Rix package, a way to help our users bootstrap these Nix-like manifests to bring in dependencies of our packages and be able to constrain those to particular versions and whatnot. Well, he wondered, would this happen on Nix? Well, what's interesting enough, and this is another nugget for me, especially something I'll get to in a little bit, is that the packages in Nix that are literally corresponding to our packages themselves are actually not updated until a new release of R hits. This is actually kind of mirroring a lot of what many of us in the life sciences industry deal with in terms of our internal R installations, where there's a central library of packages, but they don't really get updated until a new version of R is released and deployed in production, and then we refresh the library with those. And apparently, these stable releases of Nix follow that same paradigm, which that's kind of food for thought for me as I think about ways of making environments a little more hardened, as they say. But that's, again, kind of a digression here. So Bruno, what he wanted to do here is that, well, what can he do to catch this more in real time with Nix? And of course, he has these nice mechanisms in place based on his learning to update what are called expressions in Nix to bring in more up-to-date versions of packages. And he was able to do that with tidyselect and then be able to then replicate the error on Nix that he was getting on that cran check in Fedora. So with that, of course, now he's updated his unit tests for Chronicler to account for this new message. That could be it right there. But Bruno, like me, likes to go a bit further deep in this and think about what is there a way to have these more up-to-date versions of packages kind of at availability whenever he needs it, instead of like custom doing this for one-off packages here and there like he did with this tidyselect situation. Well, another thing that we've been plugging a lot is using automation when you can, right? And so Nix can be incorporated quite nicely in GitHub Actions, which is, of course, a great way for you to run like your CI/CD testing suite and whatnot for package development. But could you also combine this with bootstrapping environments of our packages, much like how we often do with renv in a lot of our GitHub Actions, where we'll use renv to take in the versions of packages we use for a given project, and then the GitHub Action will look at that log file, install everything, and then be just as if we were on our development machine, give or take a few differences with that particular environment. There is a way to, of course, do this on Nix, but he had to do a little bit of magic along the way. Well, him and his colleague Philip Bowman have started a GitHub organization with their fork of the Nix packages repository, which basically contains all the expressions for every package that's built in the Nix ecosystem. And yes, this includes R itself and the packages within R that are built with these Nix expressions. So in theory, you could take this, clone it, update the expression to get like a more up-to-date version of the package. Well, as that version gets up to date, guess what's going to have to do? There are no binaries of that new version available at that time, which means you're compiling from source. And yes, if you ever compiled stuff in the tidyverse from source and you're on Linux, get yourself a coffee or your favorite water beverage, you're going to be there a while. Ain't nobody got time for that, right, Mike?
Nope, especially when it comes to, trying to install the tidyverse or something like that. That's a suite of packages all getting built from source for sure. You're going to have to take a walk.
Take a walk, get those steps in. But you don't want to do that over and over again because you can only do so much walking in a day probably. But there is a happy medium here. There is a happy ending to this. And that is you can actually, in the Nix ecosystem, have your own binary cache of binary versions of packages. And that is using this service called Cachix, which I had never heard about until this post. But basically, one of the things I've been benoming in my early days of my Nix journey is the fact that I was having to compile some R packages from source. And I was living that very time sync situation that we were just referencing. But apparently with Cachix is that you can hook that up to your maybe GitHub action that Bruno's working on here. And in essence, through some clever manipulation of how this is triggered, he's got a process now where every day, maybe it's multiple times a day, that then there is a push to this repo that's going to do the caching. And then that is going to automatically build these packages if they're new, and then push them to this custom Cachix binary cache, such that if he builds an expression from this point on with Nix, and then he is able to reference this custom cache in his kind of preamble for the expression, it will figure out that A, is this version of, say, tidyselect available on the custom cache that Bruno set up? If yes, it's going to pull down that binary version right away. And if it's not in the not in that Cachix, it's going to look for, most likely where it will be, is the default Nix repository for binary cache. If it's a package that hasn't been updated in months, it's probably going to be there in the Nix stable repository, and it's going to pull from that binary cache. So in essence, he's got a workflow now where he can pull these binary versions either from his custom cache or from the default Nix cache. That, to me, is massive, folks. That is absolutely massive, because this was arguably one of the biggest deterrents I've seen thus far in my limited experience of Nix that may have just been solved for this quote-unquote developer setup. I'm really intrigued by this, because this may be something I want to plug in to my package development, because now that I actually have one or two open source packages under my name that are starting to get used by some people that I'm working with, I want to make sure that I'm up to date on these issues, albeit they're not on CRAN yet. But at the same time, if they ever to get on CRAN, I want to harden my development setup for this. So this is an amazing approach that, again, everything's in the open. They got links, and Bruno's got links to the GitHub repository where this cache is being built, and this other custom repository that's doing kind of the triggering of all this. I think there are a lot of principles here that we all can take from a developer perspective to give ourselves extra peace of mind for these cases where CRAN might have some mysterious errors in these checks. And of course, they're not going to tell you how deep the rabbit hole goes of which dependency of a dependency actually caused a failure. It's on you as a package maintainer to figure that piece out. But this may be a step in the right direction to being more proactive in figuring that out. And so I'll be paying attention to this workflow and maybe grabbing some nuggets of this as I continue on my, albeit it's still baby steps, but I've been venturing and running Nix on a virtual machine, trying to start bootstrapping R environments, bootstrapping my other tools of choice from a developer perspective. And this one I'm definitely going to keep an eye on as another way to augment my potential workflow here. So again, this post had a mix of everything. The detective work to figure out just which dependency caused this error, fixing the annoyance of having to compile all this manually every single time. And lo and behold, we got some really fancy GitHub actions and caching to thank Bruno for. So kudos to Bruno for this immense rabbit hole journey here in this part of the Nix journey.
Yeah, it is a little bit of a rabbit hole, Eric, but I think there's a lot in here that might be useful to those using Nix, and maybe those even not using Nix, or those maybe on their journey as well. One thing that sort of stood out to me is for anyone that has a unit test in their R package or their R repository, and that unit test is maybe running programmatically or on some schedule or something like that, you should probably be aware that in the latest version of the tidy select package, if you have a dplyr select call, and the error message that's going to get returned if one of the columns in that select statement doesn't exist, it used to say can't subset columns that don't exist. Now it says can't select columns that don't exist. So if you have an expect error call in your unit test and you're looking specifically for that keyword subset, that's not going to fire anymore. So that test is actually going to fail because that regex, those strings will not match, essentially. So you may need to go in and update your unit tests and take a look at the unit tests that you have across your different R packages and repositories to make sure that you are not too going to get bit by this issue the same way that Bruno did. And it was really interesting to me as well how the binaries, I guess, of the release before, I guess, the 1.2.0 release of Tidy Select, which is now quote unquote the old version, were the versions of Tidy Select getting installed on Debian and Windows and Mac, for these CRAN package checks, but it was compiling from source on Fedora. So that's, there's all these funky things that take place, that I think we see all the time, that are huge head scratchers for when your packages are going through these automated tests across all these different operating systems, when they're trying to pass their CRAN checks. Right, they'll pass 9 of them, and then the 10th one will fail, and it'll probably make you want to throw your computer out the window half the time. But it just sometimes takes a little investigative work, like Bruno did, or maybe diving into your R4DS Slack community or your Mastodon community, and trying to figure out collectively what's going on here. And hopefully, it didn't take Bruno too long to figure that out. But, as you mentioned, I think Nix actually is going to allow him to easily, handle these types of situations in the future, where his unit tests need to ensure that they're running against the latest versions of all packages, or maybe, on some OSs, it'll be, building the latest binaries versus on other OSs, the latest packages compiled from source. So, I think one avenue, again, to try to do some of this stuff, might be having all sorts of different Docker images to handle all these different edge cases and use cases and operating systems. But it seems like Nix actually might be a more streamlined and efficient workflow to be able to make those switches a little bit quicker and run those tests within different environments a little quicker than you might have to do otherwise. Right? And before any of these technologies, you would have to spin up VMs or something like that, or install, all sorts of different versions of R locally and all sorts of different versions of R packages locally, and just sort of cross your fingers that, your package checks would succeed on other operating systems that you didn't really necessarily have any access to. So, that's really interesting. And then maybe the last thing I'll point out here that I thought was interesting and useful, a lot of times when we're running GitHub Actions, right? It's running on some piece of compute that we don't have full access to. So we're relying really on a YAML file at the end of the day. And maybe this goes back to, who was it? Yaron Ooms that authored that blog post a couple of weeks ago about like, workflows in R and, do not repeat yourself. And
Miles McBain.
Oh, Miles McBain. That's exactly who it was. Oh my goodness. This sort of brings me back to that where, eventually you get to try to just do everything with a YAML file and it'll drive you crazy. But we're at the mercy, with GitHub Actions, for better or for worse. A lot has been abstracted for us, which is awesome. But we're at the mercy of a YAML file, right, to be able to handle, setting up that piece of compute, that runner in GitHub Actions, installing the dependencies on there. And one thing I think that can be tricky sometimes is maybe authenticating into different services that you want to leverage. And that was my first thought here when I was taking a look at this CacheX, this CacheX utility here that allows you to cache different packages within sort of your Nix environment. But one of the interesting things is that you don't need to authenticate to CacheX to simply pull binaries. All Bruno had to do was really just these 2 lines of YAML specifying the CacheX GitHub action version that he wants to use. And then he has a particular name, I assume. He's logged into the CacheX platform and developed his own cache that's B-Rodriguez. And that's where his cache lives, and that's all he has to specify in his GitHub action to be able to pull binaries from that cache. So I think that's incredibly powerful. Really nice that how simplified sort of this workflow is to be able to set up your CacheX cache within a GitHub Actions workflow. So fantastic blog post from start to finish. It really walks us through sort of the entire problem space and how he was able to solve it. And another feather in Nix's cap, I would say.
Yep, I totally agree. And I'm, again, very much anything that can make your development life easier to be proactive on these issues happening. You've done that hard work of building those unit tests. You're doing what you need to do in terms of giving yourself some sanity, hopefully, as dependencies get updated. But to be able to put this in action first when you need it in an ad hoc way, be able to just pull this environment down within probably a matter of a minute versus like an hour, like it would be by default. I mean, they can't underscore the time savings you get from the caching mechanism. But also, there is a lot to glean from these repositories that you mentioned, Mike, that Bruno and Philippe have set up for these GitHub Action workflows. I was in GitHub Action nightmares a couple of weeks ago debugging things, and I remember with a Quartal compilation, I almost just threw my keyboard out the window. I just could not figure out what the bloody heck was happening. So yeah, there is a danger sometimes of having the abstraction too high up versus what lower level it's doing. And the other piece of advice I'll give is that, it may seem intimidating to be like, these GitHub Actions are doing such magical things with these YAMLs. What's behind these actions most of the time? It's shell scripting. It's just doing stuff on Linux and then be able to troubleshoot that. So like I went into the GitHub action source of some of those Quartal actions and I figured out, okay, it's these kind of Quartal commands with this Boolean check if like I have this render flag enabled or not. Then I realized, you know what? Okay, I can take matters in my own hands. I can do my own custom rendering. It's not as intimidating as it sounds. It's just debugging can be a complete nightmare unless you know where to look. So I'd imagine Bruno's had a few of those experiences too, like all of us.
Definitely. And GitHub Actions has its own sort of cache as well, which
that is true.
Has bit me a couple times, not to speak ill of GitHub Actions, because I do love it. But yeah, there's caches everywhere.
Yep, caches. Unfortunately, it's not the kind of cache I can buy things with. But, nonetheless, hey, it's all everywhere, right? Speaking of major updates that we're seeing in the ecosystems these days in terms of the tooling we use, another one I've kept my very close eye on with a lot of influential projects that I'm trying to bootstrap right now is we are happy to talk about a new release for webR itself. When this blog post comes from the Tidyverse blog and authored by the webR architect and brilliant engineer George Stagg, who is in this blog post getting us through or talking us through a few of these major updates that we see in the webR ecosystem, and I'm going to speak to a few of these, and I know some of these I'm going to be able to benefit from very quickly, I would imagine. But the first major of note is that now they are basing webR on the latest stable release of R itself, because in essence, they have to bootstrap R with a couple of the custom shims under the hood to make it seem like you're installing a package from a default repository, where instead you're installing it from webR's binary package repository. So they always have to, in essence, patch R to make all this work, and now they've patched the latest stable version of R, which of course will be great for consistency with maybe your typical environment that you're building these analyses on. And another great feature that I think the users are going to definitely notice is some improved error reporting too. Whereas in the past, you might see a custom like uncalled exception if something crazy was happening in the webR process with respect to maybe an error in the R code itself. Well, now you're going to be able to see the actual error in the JavaScript console whenever webR is running, which of course is going to help you immensely with debugging to narrow down, oh, did I get the JavaScript code wrong that I'm using webR with, or was it in my R code itself? So that, again, for usability, a massive improvement for the quality of life. And speaking of quality of life enhancements, ones that you'll hopefully be able to see and interact with is big improvements to the graphics engine. Because now the graphics that are drawn with webR's, they call it the canvas function, they're going to be captured in that R-based session in a similar way that's consistent with other output types that you would see in a normal installation of R, which is leading to more streamlined, interaction with these graphics. And also along those lines, graphics that you create in base R have had massive improvements to the rendering engine. And the blog post, when you see this linked in our weekly, you'll see very sharp looking images that they're able to produce when you evaluate that code. And even as I'm talking now, I'm running through these snippets and they look very nice, great anti-alias text. The symbols with the R logo look really sharp. Everything looks as if you were in your native R session. Again, just massive, amazing improvements under the hood to make this, very seamless and attractive to the end user. And it doesn't just stop with graphic objects. There has been a lot of under the hood enhancements as well as some new user-facing enhancements that the R objects that are created in these webR processes are going to be, more easily converted back and forth between their JavaScript counterparts and their R counterparts. Where does this fit in the big picture? The big thing for me is the data frame. And R, that is literally the fundamental building block of basically 99% of my analyses. Now, of course, in R, you have your columns and you got your rows, right? That's not always what JavaScript treats data as. Especially if you're familiar with D3, it is definitely a different type of layout you often see, where it's basically the column is given a name. It's like a named vector of things in a row-wise type fashion layout. But there are functions now in webR to go back and forth between these JavaScript notations and the R native kind of representations. In fact, there's a handy function called called 2D3, where you can simply take that data frame in the R process, put it into a format that you can feed into any of your custom D3 visualizations. These things are massive for that interoperability between maybe using R to do the heavy lifting statistically, but if you're familiar with JavaScript and you want to keep with those JavaScript visuals, have at it. Have your D3 magic and be able to get that construct of the data as you need it. So again, great way for you to take maybe baby steps if you're new to R, but you're familiar with JavaScript, a way to get the best of both worlds. Really, really a big fan of that. And then some really fun plumbing type enhancements here that I'm paying a lot of attention to is that with collaboration, you name dropped them earlier, Mike, your own as well as Uton, they have new system libraries in the webR process, and as well as a custom webR Docker container. Hey, containers again for you, which they've included some new numeric libraries, as well as the ImageMagick image manipulation suite. And wait for it, there is now a Rust compiler configured so that if your R package involves Rust in some way, you're now going to be able to compile that into WebAssembly too. Absolutely amazing stuff. And to really, intrigue you even further, embedded in the post is a Shiny Live powered web app from Jerome himself on using that magic package that he's created in the past, but now in the blog post where you can absolutely distort or make fun of this random cat image. And I'm literally doing it right now as I speak. It is so responsive, so quick. I can't believe this is happening, Mike. This is just amazing.
It's as if the Shiny app's running locally. It's insane. It's actually like faster. I mean, the fact that you can put effects on this image to like negate it and totally changing how it's visually represented is awesome. You can upload your own image, which is what I've done. I uploaded an old Hex logo, and I'm just messing around with it right now, rotating it, blurring it, imploding it. It's pretty cool. Flipping it, reversing it. It's awesome. I cannot believe how responsive it is.
Yeah, this has come such a long way. I mean, even it was maybe 4 or 5 months ago that it would take a good minute or two for these things to bootstrap, and here we are. We got this as if it was plugged into the blog post directly. Like this is magical stuff. So I'm really, really intrigued by where this is going. And again, we're seeing more in the community leverage Rust. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of great enhancements with this. And speaking of packages themselves, there is now additional refresh, if you will, on the packages in the CRAN ecosystem that are now supported in webR. That total is now bumped to 12,969, or about 63% of the available CRAN packages that are now supported natively in webR. And like I mentioned before, what George and other engineers have to do with this webR binary cache of packages is they have to compile them in a special way so that they're supported by WebAssembly. So not everything is there yet, but that's a massive jump compared to where we've been, even just like I said, a few months ago to what is supported in webR. That is absolutely amazing.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And this is just, more exciting improvements. I think, probably the biggest thing for me as a, practitioner, somebody who's very data hands-on in most of our projects, as well as you talked about, Eric, the ability to switch back and forth between JavaScript sort of data frame objects, especially, I guess, particularly in this case, we're talking about raw objects of typed array, array buffer, and array buffer view. Those are the types of raw vector objects that may now be used to construct R objects. And like you said, you can go back from an R data frame to a JavaScript object with the either toObject function, or if you want to go more the D3 route, that would be the toD3 function in JavaScript. So that's exciting because to me that makes it feel much more accessible to work with data within this webR framework as well. It kind of feels a little. I've been watching a lot of the Observable project, and they have some excellent utilities, blog posts, documentation around how to sort of convert back and forth between either Pandas data frames, R data frames, and the JavaScript data frames that really power the visuals on that platform. So this sort of reminds me of that in terms of how easy it is to go back and forth between the two, and I think that ease of use is really going to go a long way towards helping people get up to speed and build tools within the webR framework. So very, very excited. Thanks to all who work on this. There's a fantastic acknowledgement section at the bottom of this, and a lot of familiar names there of folks who are working hard to continue to drive this forward. And especially thanks to George Stagg for sort of spearheading all of this and putting the blog post together.
Yeah, and any package authors out there that are saying, hey, you know what? I know my package is not CRAN. Can I do this in WebAssembly? Oh, yes, you can. They actually have a RWASM package to help you compile your own R package into WebAssembly and be able to manage a repository for that. And yes, we were talking about GitHub Actions earlier. Another, nugget at the end here is that they have put links to their reusable GitHub Actions that you could get inspiration from or just leverage yourself so that your package is compiled. And yes, you can also check out, we talked about this before, the R Universe project is offering webR binaries of packages on any of the packages that they host too. So there is not just that binary repository that webR is hosting themselves. R Universe is another great inspiration or a great source of this as well. So lots to choose from in this space.
Yes, absolutely. Don't blink.
Don't blink, you might miss it, just like how you might miss some very snazzy visuals that we're going to talk about in our last highlight today. And as Mike, you and I can probably sympathize that, especially early on in maybe a data science journey, or you're leveraging, or you're hearing about things like the tidyverse, suite of packages for the first time, and you're trying to get a handle on a lot of these operations that occur when you want to manipulate your data frames, like adding new variables, doing transposing, doing group summaries. A lot of people, myself included, do like to have a nice visual to accompany maybe the text around just what those particular functions are doing. Well, we're happy to share that Andrew Heiss has authored a latest blog post on visualizing many of the important dplyr functions with both single group as well as multiple group processing. And not just having static pictures, folks. He has handcrafted some absolutely amazing animations to go with this that I can imagine he is making heavy use of this in his statistics lectures and his coursework. But yeah, of course, we're in an audio podcast talking about visuals here, but boy, oh boy, you look at these and how he made them, first off, is that he tried to leverage what Garrick Aiden-Bowie from Posit has built with his custom visuals in the Tidy Explain package, but he was running into a couple limitations, albeit especially around the group processing. So Andrew, showing his graphical editing chops here, has built custom Adobe Illustrator powered visuals and After Effects. But guess what? He's actually shared the files that if you have this software, you go import this in and try it yourself. I'm not an Adobe customer, so I can't exactly run this myself. But hey, it's there if you have that same software. But throughout the blog post, he's got, not just the narrative of what a function does, such as mutate, but you can simply hit play in the blog post and then see literally the transformation of that data with this nice transition kind of layout from left to right with new variables or new records being colored the same as the new code snippet that's being shown on the right side. It is very easy to digest. He does this with mutate, with summarize, and then where it really starts to shine is the grouping visuals, where now, if you're grouping by a categorical variable, he's able to separate these blocks out logically and then really show the impact of that operation and then be able to ungroup that at the end to get that original setback or things like that, and also custom mutations within groups. So he's got the code snippets alongside the visuals. Again, really great to digest visually what is happening here. And boy, I wish I had had this when I was learning data manipulation in the old days. But of course, in my day, not to be that guy saying get off my lawn, we didn't have dplyr back then. We had plyr midway through my R journey, and that did not have nearly the resources that dplyr has, both under the hood as well as in educational materials. But again, the visuals really do a terrific job of really isolating the key incremental steps in these operations, which I think you can see it in a pipeline operation just with the text. But seeing that visual paired with it, you really start to see what is the impact of each of those statements. So there is a whole lot to digest here. We definitely invite you to check out the post because our ramblings can only do it so much justice. But kudos to Andrew for handcrafting all this from the ground up. It is truly amazing stuff.
Yes, this is fantastic. I know Andrew is a professor, and this is just I wish I had him as a professor because this is just going to go such a long way towards building his students' understanding of, especially, I think mutate isn't too difficult to wrap your head around. It's a little straightforward, but once you start getting into grouping by, aggregation, summarization, doing a mutate on a grouped data frame, joins, things like that, it takes it to an additional level of abstraction that can be difficult to wrap your head around when you're a beginner. And back in my day, Eric, it was Excel pivot tables. That's how I first got my start in understanding some of these concepts, and then I had to bring it over to the R side, and I was like, wow, this is maybe a hot take a little bit, but what has a better expressive syntax to tell you exactly what it's doing than dplyr and the tidyverse? I don't think there's anything else out there. Surely a whole lot better than Excel. I can at least tell you that much in terms of just being able to look at the code. I think SQL is probably a close second, but to be able to look at the code and understand sort of exactly what's going on, and these examples applied to data, I think are fantastic. These visuals go such a long way towards building that understanding as well, because he's really representing sort of the action taking place here, whether it be grouping, summarization, or a mutate. So hats off to him. I would say that his work doing this, he may not realize just how impactful this might be on his students, or folks learning R who stumble across this blog post. So if you know someone who's trying to learn R, having a tough time, first point them to the tidyverse. That would be my recommendation to wrap their head around data wrangling. But I think this is going to be a fantastic blog post to point people to as well, to help them get up to speed, to help them sort of get over the hump, right, in building their understanding of data manipulation in R. So I really just can't understate, I've said it a few times now, but I can't understate sort of the importance of this, and how useful I think this type of visual instruction can be.
And another thing that I want to say is critically important, especially in this new age of, I don't know how new it is per se, but really something I've been gleaming in the community of really openly sharing our wins and our key learnings to educate ourselves and others, is that you may be wondering, oh, wow, Andrew, you did such amazing work with this. I wish I could use this in my materials. Guess what? You can, folks. These are all Creative Commons licensed, which means he's got links to like the finished products, both the video form and animated GIFs and static images of all this. So if you want to leverage this in your materials, have at it, right? I mean, that is a huge service that Andrew has done here. He could have easily kept this under his own like private coursework, materials, but he's sharing it with all of us. So I think that is a massive win for, all of us kind of in this educational space, or even our organizations trying to help teach others that are new to R how some of these operations work. You better believe I'll be drawing upon some of this when I get questions about how some of these, group processing and dplyr works and the like. It's just amazing work, Andrew, and even more amazing that you are so willing to share this with everybody. It's a new age, I would say.
And has the time to author all of this content out there. I don't know how he does it, but thank you so much.
Yeah, I whatever you're either ingesting or whatever life hack you've done, please pass it our ways, because we would love to have it in our respective.
It's got to be those damn cold tubs. I still got to do that.
Yeah, I think we're late on that, aren't we? But what you're not late on is that if you boot up rweekly.org, you're never going to be late in seeing the latest and greatest from the R community, showcased by the R community. Great new packages, new announcements, and new blog posts, much like what we talked about here. And we'll take a couple minutes to share some of our additional finds from the issue. And for me, it's a plug, especially for those in the health and medical industries. The R Medicine Conference is back for another year, and they have just opened up their open call for talks. And that conference is taking place on June 10th through 14th of this year. And on top of having the call for abstracts and talks open, they've announced that they have keynotes lined up from Stephanie Hicks and Gundula Bosch, talking about some really innovative work in medical research and genomic analysis, always stuff that I resonate with, especially in the early part of my career, where R was immensely helpful as I was doing a lot of genetic and biomarker analysis. So I always have a soft spot for any talk around that. But yeah, the abstracts are open. We'll put a link in the show notes to the post from the R Consortium of all the details. And it's always been a really top-notch, well-run conference. It's been a great kind of companion in arms, so to speak, with our R and Pharma conference that I'm a part of. But yeah, they all are very complementary of each other and really great to see these resources shared in the community. Mike, what did you find?
No, that's awesome, Eric. I found a fantastic blog post, I think authored by Hannah Frick, who's a member of the Tidy Models team at Posit, and she's been instrumental in incorporating survival analysis into the Tidy Models ecosystem. So there is now support for survival analysis for time to event data across Tidy Models, which is really, really fantastic and exciting for those of us, which I know you as much in life sciences as, believe it or not, me in financial services and credit risk use these time to event survival analysis types of models because they handle, leveraging longitudinal data. They, have a good setup to be able to introduce hierarchical models as well, with mixed effects models or Bayesian type models that are in these longitudinal types of data sets, as well as these hierarchical types of data sets. We see them all the time. I mean, those things are present in a lot of the data sets that we work with in a way that machine learning just can't necessarily handle. Right? So survival analysis is really a great tool to be able to use in those particular use cases. There's a fantastic amount of links in here. There's also an additional blog post that walks through a very hands-on data use case, a case study here called How Long Until Building Complaints Are Dispositioned. That's now on the Tidy Models website. It's linked at the very bottom of this blog post, and that's sort of how I came across this R Weekly highlight as well, because I saw that one, I think, come across Mastodon. And it's just a great walkthrough and use case of all the different functionality that we now have around survival modeling within the Tidy Models framework. So super excited about this. Thanks to all the folks that worked on this, and thanks to Hannah for putting this blog post together.
Yeah, I'm going to dive into this case study after this because I'm starting to get back into the time to event mode now with some custom analyses and clinical operations, and this could be a very nice way to benchmark newer models and take what I've been learning over the years of Tidy Models and apply it directly to time to event. It has been requested for a long time, and it is gratifying to see, the Tidy Models team has taken this head on, and now we've got a boatload of additional capabilities to choose from. So, kudos to everybody on the team for that.
Yeah, no trivial effort, I'm sure, because survival analysis modeling has a lot of different nuances from machine learning, but you can still borrow a lot of practices, that we might traditionally associate with machine learning, like hyperparameter tuning and things like that, and leverage those within survival analysis workflows. So it was no trivial effort, I'm sure, but extremely powerful when brought together, and I'm very grateful for the fact that they have.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm also grateful for, our weekly even existing so we can see this on a weekly basis and be able to talk to all of you about it. But it is, like I mentioned, powered by the community, and we always are appreciative of all of your help. And the best way to contribute to our weekly is send us a pull request with that awesome new blog post, that great new package you discovered, that great new resource that you think deserves the attention of the community. It's just a pull request away at the top right corner of rweekly.org. You'll see the friendly little AutoCAD image there. Just click on that, and you got yourself a pull request template right there. It's all Markdown all the time. I live in Markdown. I live and breathe Markdown now. I wish I could write my emails in Markdown and have them render in real time, but that ain't happening in Microsoft Outlook anytime soon. But I digress. At least Safari Weekly it does. So you can have that at your fingertips. And as well as we love hearing from all of you in the audience as well. You got a few ways to get in touch with us. Got a handy little contact page linked in this episode's show notes. And as well as you can send us a friendly little boost along the way if you're on those awesome modern podcast apps like Podverse, Fountain, Cast-O-Matic, CurioCaster. I could go on and on. They're all linked in the show notes if you want to get a nice selection of all that. And yeah, this is now going to be the second episode, our new podcast host. And other than yours truly botching his end of the recording, let's hope that this one goes more smoothly this time around. Did some testing before this, so I'm fingers crossed it'll sound as clear as we've always been. But we are on a new host, so if you have any trouble finding the show, we have updated all the links at R Weekly to our new podcast landing page, so it should be a seamless transition. But as always, don't hesitate to get in touch with me if you have any difficulties. And the best way to do that, you can find me on Mastodon these days. I am at our podcast at podcastindex.social. I'm also on LinkedIn with show announcements and the like, and on that Twitter X thingy-jingy at the Rcast. And Mike, where can the listeners find you?
Sure, you can find me on Mastodon at Mike_Thomas at fossadon.org, or you can find me on LinkedIn by searching Ketchbrook Analytics, KETCHBROOK, and see what I'm up to lately.
Awesome stuff. And we were on the other side of that major Eclipse event, but the community train never stops with the R ecosystem. And as always, we thank you so much for listening to us from wherever you are around the world. And we'll be back with another edition of R Weekly Highlights next week.